I never should have picked her up. That's the thought that haunts me now, the memory I can't shake. I should have ignored her, driven past like any other sane person. But that night, the storm was relentless, and something about the way she stood there, so still, so patient, made me feel like I had no choice. It was late, past midnight, and I was driving home from my shift at the bar just outside of town. The old highway was empty, slick with rain, my wipers struggling against the downpour. Trees lined both sides of the road, their dark limbs bending under the wind. And then I saw her, a woman, standing on the shoulder, drenched to the bone, her long, tangled hair plastered against her face. She wasn't waving or signaling for help, she was just standing there, watching the road as if waiting for something. Waiting for me. My foot eased off the gas before my brain could catch up. I don't pick up hitchhikers. Ever. It was something my mother drilled into me as a kid, never trust a stranger on the side of the road. But something about this woman seemed wrong. Not in a dangerous way, but in a way that made my stomach twist. I pulled over. I rolled the window down just enough to be heard. Need a ride? She turned her head slowly, too slowly, her movements unnaturally stiff. Then she nodded once and stepped toward the car. The moment she got in, the temperature dropped. The air smelled of damp earth and something faintly metallic. She didn't speak as she shut the door, just folded her hands in her lap and stared straight ahead. I hesitated, then cleared my throat. Where you headed? Just up the road, she murmured. Her voice was soft, almost distant. I nodded, pulling back onto the highway. The rain pounded against the windshield, and I tried to ignore the way my skin prickled, how the hairs on my arms stood on end. Every few seconds, I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. She was too pale, her skin almost gray under the dim glow of the dashboard. Her dress clung to her thin frame, dark with rain, and her fingers, God, her fingers, were long and unnaturally stiff, her nails blackened like something rotting. I swallowed hard. The gas station was coming up. A safe place. I need to stop for gas, I said, forcing my voice to stay casual. She didn't respond. I pulled into the station, grateful for the flickering neon lights, the hum of an old radio playing inside the store. Want anything? I asked, more to see if she would answer than anything else. She turned her head, just slightly, and met my eyes. I'll never forget that look. Her pupils were too large, swallowing most of her irises, and her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. No. Something inside me screamed to run, but I didn't. I got out, trying to steady my breathing as I swiped my card at the pump. The rain was letting up now, just a light drizzle, but the air still felt thick. Heavy. I kept glancing back at the car, watching her through the glass. She didn't move, didn't blink. Then, in the space of a heartbeat, she was gone. I froze. The passenger door was still shut. The seat was dry, completely dry, as if she had never been there at all. But the back seat wasn't. A wet imprint stretched across the fabric, as if someone had been sitting there the entire time. My stomach twisted into knots. I wasn't alone. I locked the doors the second I got back in the car, my hands trembling as I turned the key. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the gas station, tires skidding on the wet pavement. I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty, the trees pressing in on either side. I tried to calm my racing heart, telling myself it was just exhaustion, just my mind playing tricks on me. Then I saw my apartment, and the front door was open. I slammed the brakes, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. I always locked my door. Always. The wind howled through the empty street, rattling the loose shutters of the old buildings. I stepped out of the car slowly, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run. But I had to check. Had to know. I pushed the door open wider, my breath hitching as the darkness inside swallowed me whole. I reached for the light switch. Nothing. The power was out. The apartment was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but full. I took a step inside. Then another. A floorboard creaked. My bedroom door was ajar, the faintest sliver of darkness beyond it. I could just make out the edge of my bed, the blankets rumpled, the sheets hanging off the side. Something shifted in the corner. I swung my phone's flashlight toward it, and there she was, crouched behind my dresser, her knees bent at an impossible angle, her body folded like something that had been broken and put back together wrong. Her smile widened. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then she whispered, "You brought me home." My vision swam. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. And just like that, she was gone. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't close my eyes, didn't turn off the lights. I sat on my couch, clutching a kitchen knife, staring at the bedroom door as if it might open on its own. Nothing happened. But in the morning, when I finally found the courage to check the room, I found something else. On the walls, carved deep into the wood, a single word. Mine. I moved out that week. Left the apartment, the town, everything. But she still found me. I started seeing her in reflections. In windows. In the background of photos I hadn't even taken. And last night, as I sat in my motel room, staring at my phone, another blocked number called. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, there was no voice. Just breathing. Wet, ragged breathing. And then, at the very end, a whisper. You gave me a ride. Story 2. I don't know why I agreed to go to that party. Maybe it was boredom, or the way my friend Michael convinced me it would be legendary. I knew I wouldn't be able to drive. I didn't even have my license at the time, so Michael offered to take me. He even suggested I leave my phone in the car, just in case I lost it in the crowd. I should have known better. By the time we arrived, the backyard was packed. Music blared from the speakers, bottles clinked, and the air smelled of beer and cigarette smoke. I recognized a few faces, but mostly stuck close to Michael, at least until he wandered off with a girl he'd been trying to impress all week. I was on my own, and I was drinking way too much. Everything was a blur, faces melting together, voices slurring, my legs barely holding me upright. I leaned against the side of the house, trying to catch my breath. My watch read just past midnight. I needed to leave. I stumbled through the backyard, scanning the crowd for Michael. He was nowhere to be found. Hey, have you seen Michael? I asked a few people. Who? No one seemed to know him. I reached into my pocket for my phone before remembering Michael had told me to leave it in his car. The car that was now missing from the driveway. He had left without me. Panic clawed its way up my throat. The thought of walking home alone made my skin crawl, but what choice did I have? My house wasn't far, maybe a couple miles, but in my drunken haze, it felt like an impossible distance. I tightened my arms around my body, shivering in the chilly night air, and started walking. The streets were empty, silent. The only sound was my own uneven breathing, the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I was still drunk, my steps unsteady, my mind foggy. Then I heard a car approaching from behind. I turned, holding out my thumb in a half-hearted attempt at hitchhiking. Maybe someone would take pity on me, save me from walking the rest of the way. The car slowed. It was an old, gray truck. The window rolled down, revealing a man in his 50s with graying hair and a thick beard. Need a ride? I hesitated. Something about him unsettled me, but the thought of walking alone in the dark felt worse. Yeah, I mumbled, giving him my address. I climbed in, the door creaking as I pulled it shut. The moment we pulled away from the curb, I regretted it. The first few minutes passed in silence. The man kept glancing at me from the corner of his eye, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. What happened to you? He finally asked. I shrugged. Just left a party. My friend ditched me. He nodded, his grip tightening. I stared out the window, trying to gauge where we were. The road looked unfamiliar, stretching out into the darkness. Then I realized. We had passed my street. I think you missed my turn, I said, forcing a laugh. My house was back there. The man didn't respond. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the truck. My stomach twisted. You shouldn't be drunk while hitchhiking, he muttered. Makes you an easy target. His hand slid from the wheel, landing on my knee. I jerked away, my pulse hammering in my ears. Let me out, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man just smiled. Then, from behind us, a bright red and blue glow filled the truck. A police siren. The man tensed. His fingers twitched against the gearshift. Before he could react, I grabbed the handle and threw the door open, tumbling onto the pavement. My knee scraped against the asphalt, but I didn't care. I ran straight for the flashing lights, waving my arms. The officer stepped out, eyes widening as he took in my disheveled state. What the hell's going on? The man in the truck hesitated. Then, without a word, he slammed on the gas, speeding off into the night. I gasped for air, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. The officer led me to the cruiser, asking me questions I could barely process. You're lucky, he said finally. We were looking for a guy in a gray truck. Someone matching his description stole from a convenience store earlier tonight. I sat in stunned silence as he drove me home. Lucky. That's what he called me. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Because something told me that man wasn't done looking for me. Story 3. I was still in college when it happened. A big party school in upstate New York. I wasn't in a sorority, but I went to a lot of frat parties. Maybe too many. Back then, I drank way more than I should have. Blackout nights were almost a weekly thing. That night was no different. My friends Deanna and Kayla convinced me to go to a party at some Kappa Sigma house. It was off campus, about 20 minutes away, but we didn't care. We pre-gamed hard at our place, then kept drinking in the Uber on the way there. By the time we arrived, I was already gone. I remember flashes. The music was loud. The house was packed. I played beer pong with some guy, I think his name was Jake, and we ended up in a corner, talking. I have no idea what about. After that, my memory just stops. The next thing I knew, I was waking up on the ground. It was freezing. My clothes were damp, my body aching. I was lying on grass, my head pounding, my mouth dry as sandpaper. I blinked against the darkness, confused. Where was I? This wasn't the frat house. I sat up too fast, my stomach lurching. The ground beneath me was uneven, cold dirt mixed with patches of dead leaves. When my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in the woods. A road stretched out a few feet away, barely illuminated by a distant streetlight. Panic crawled up my spine. How the hell did I get here? I patted my pockets, searching for my phone, empty. My purse was gone too. My heart pounded as I scrambled to my feet, my legs shaky. I had to get out of there. I stumbled toward the road, wrapping my arms around myself. The trees loomed overhead, branches swaying in the wind, casting shadows that moved too much, like they were alive. I swallowed my fear. I needed to find help. The road was dead silent. No cars, no houses, no signs of life. I stood there, shaking, my breath coming fast. Then, in the distance, headlights. I stepped forward, waving my arms. The car slowed, its tires crunching against the gravel as it pulled over. The driver rolled down his window. A man, maybe mid-30s, scruffy beard, thin face. You okay? I hesitated. But what choice did I have? I need a ride. Someone left me out here, I stammered. He nodded, unlocking the door. Hop in. Everything in me screamed not to. But I had no phone, no idea where I was. I got in. The inside of the car smelled like old cigarettes and cheap cologne. The man kept glancing at me as he drove, his fingers tapping against the wheel. What happened to you? I don't know, I admitted. I was at a party. Then I woke up in the woods. He nodded, his grip tightening. Something about the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. I focused on the road ahead, but the farther we drove, the more uneasy I felt. The frat house was 20 minutes from my place. We had been driving for at least that long, but nothing looked familiar. Hey, how much farther? I asked. The man didn't answer right away. Then he muttered, not far. My stomach twisted. I glanced at the dashboard. He hadn't put an address into his GPS. Something was wrong. Are we going the right way? I tried to keep my voice calm. The man smiled. It wasn't friendly. We'll get there, he said. I gripped the door handle. My pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it. The road ahead was empty, stretching into endless darkness. Trees surrounded us on both sides, no streetlights, no houses, just wilderness. My breath came in shallow gasps. Then he reached for my knee. What color underwear are you wearing? I yanked my leg away, my throat going dry. Let me out, I whispered. He didn't slow down. His hand tightened on the wheel, his other hand reaching toward me again. I didn't think. I just acted. I grabbed the steering wheel and jerked it hard to the right. The car swerved. The man yelled, fighting for control, but I didn't let go. We hit the ditch, the impact throwing me against the door. My head smacked the window, pain exploding behind my eyes. I didn't stop. I fumbled for the handle, shoving the door open, tumbling onto the wet ground. Then I ran. The forest swallowed me whole. Branches scraped against my arms, my legs, my face. I could hear him behind me, crashing through the underbrush, cursing. Come back here, you little... I ran faster. My lungs burned, my legs screaming, but I didn't stop. I didn't stop until the sound of his footsteps faded, until the only thing I could hear was my own ragged breathing. I collapsed behind a fallen tree, pressing my hands over my mouth, trying to stay silent. Minutes passed. Then, a voice. Low, whispering. I know you're in there. Terror locked my muscles in place. I forced myself to stay still, to not breathe. I'll find you, he sang. You can't hide forever. The footsteps circled. Then, just as suddenly, silence. I waited, and waited. I don't know how long I stayed there, curled into myself, shaking. maybe an hour, maybe more. Eventually, the sun began to rise, and I ran. I reached the road just as another car appeared. An older man this time, concerned eyes behind thick glasses. He rolled down his window, looking at me like I was something out of a nightmare. "Jesus, are you okay?" I could barely speak. I just nodded. "Get in, kid. Let's get you home." This time, I hesitated. But something told me this man wasn't like the other one. I climbed into the back seat, still shaking. He drove me home. When I got back, Deanna and Kayla were frantic. They had my phone, my purse. They had been about to call the police. No one knew what happened. No one saw me leave the party. No one knew how I got to those woods. But when I checked my phone, my stomach dropped. A single, unread text message. From an unknown number. "You got away this time." Story 4. I don't know why I stopped for him. I had been driving for hours, trying to outrun the suffocating silence of the road, the endless blackness of the highway stretching through miles of nothingness. The radio had given up an hour ago, filling the car with static, and my eyes burned from staring at the dim glow of the headlights cutting through the mist. Then I saw him. A figure, standing just past the bend, on the shoulder of the road. His posture was stiff, his head slightly tilted downward, as if he had been waiting there for a long, long time. I should have kept driving, but my hands betrayed me, easing the wheel to the side. The car slowed, gravel crunching under the tires as I pulled over. The man stepped forward. In the dim light, I could see he was tall, too tall. His frame was thin, draped in a jacket that hung loosely over his shoulders. He carried nothing, no bags, no belongings. His face was gaunt, hollowed by shadows. I rolled the window down just a crack. "Where you headed?" His lips curled into something that might have been a smile. "Anywhere." A cold wind slipped into the car, carrying the scent of damp earth and something metallic. My stomach tightened. I should have left. I should have driven away. Instead, I unlocked the door. "Get in." The moment he settled into the seat, the air in the car changed. The warmth from the heater faded. The scent of rain and soil thickened, pressing into my lungs. The stranger didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there, his hands folded neatly in his lap. I forced a laugh, gripping the wheel. "So, where you coming from?" He turned his head slowly, those dark eyes unreadable. "Nowhere." I swallowed. "Right. Well, I can take you to the next town. Should be about 40 miles up." He didn't answer. I focused on the road, trying to ignore the way my pulse pounded in my ears. The fog had thickened, swallowing the highway, my headlights barely piercing through it. I drove in silence, every mile stretching longer than the last. Then I noticed something. The numbers on the odometer weren't changing. We had been driving for nearly 20 minutes, but the mileage hadn't shifted. The gas gauge hadn't moved, either. My hands tightened on the wheel. I chanced a glance at the hitchhiker. He was still sitting perfectly still, his expression empty. A chill ran down my spine. I reached for my phone, trying to check the time at. The screen was blank. Dead. I had just charged it before I left. The unease in my gut twisted into something worse. "We should be getting close," I muttered, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. The man smiled. It wasn't friendly. "We've been closed for a while." The road stretched endlessly ahead, the fog growing thicker, pressing against the windshield like something alive. I stole another glance at the odometer. Still the same number. The radio crackled, then cut off entirely. No sound, no hum of the engine, just silence. I pressed harder on the gas. The car didn't respond. The speedometer was stuck, frozen at 50 miles per hour. My breath hitched. "What the hell is going on?" I whispered. The hitchhiker chuckled. Low, soft, like he had been waiting for me to ask. "This road," he said, "doesn't lead where you think it does." I turned to him, my pulse slamming in my ears. "What?" He leaned closer, his dark eyes glittering. "You should have kept driving." A sharp pain lanced through my chest. I gasped, my vision blurring. My hands slipped from the wheel, my body collapsing forward. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing down on me. My heartbeat slowed, each thud sluggish, distant. The hitchhiker reached out, his fingers pressing against my forehead. "You gave me a ride," he murmured. And then, everything went black. I woke up alone. The car was still running, idling on the side of the road. The hitchhiker was gone. My phone buzzed against the dashboard, screen flickering back to life. The odometer was working again. The clock read 3:16 a.m. I checked the back seat. Empty. I checked the ground outside. No footprints. But something was wrong. My reflection in the rearview mirror. It wasn't moving. I lifted my hand. The face in the mirror didn't. I screamed, but the sound didn't come from my mouth. It came from behind me. Story 5. I've always been told never to pick up hitchhikers. My mom warned me when I first got my driver's license. It doesn't matter if they look harmless, she'd said. They could be anyone. A killer. A lunatic. Someone looking to make you disappear. I always followed that advice. Until that night. Until her. It was late, just past midnight, when I started my drive home. I had been visiting my brother a few towns over, and instead of staying the night like he suggested, I insisted on making the 2-hour drive back. I don't know why. Maybe I just wanted my own bed, my own space. The highway was deserted, stretching for miles between dense patches of forest. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the occasional streetlights cast long, eerie shadows along the road. That's when I saw her. She was walking along the shoulder, her figure illuminated for just a second in my headlights. I only caught a glimpse, a young woman in a long dress, her bare feet moving slowly over the gravel. Her hair hung in tangled waves over her shoulders, and she held one arm close to her chest, as if cradling something. I drove past her before my brain even registered what I had seen. For a mile, I debated stopping. I could still see her in my mind, her thin frame barely upright, her head tilted downward as if she was in pain. She looked lost. Alone. My mom's warning echoed in my head, but I ignored it. I eased onto the shoulder and put the car in reverse, backing up slowly until my headlights caught her again. She hadn't moved. My heart pounded as I reached across the seat and rolled the window down. "Hey, do you need a ride?" She lifted her head. Her eyes were hollow, black. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then she nodded once and stepped toward the car. The door creaked as she climbed inside, settling into the passenger seat without a word. Up close, she looked even worse. Her skin was deathly pale, almost gray under the dim dashboard lights. Her dress, if you could call it that, was thin, tattered at the edges, soaked from the mist in the air. Her feet were dirty, scraped, as if she had been walking for miles. I cleared my throat, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. "Where are you headed?" I asked. Her voice was soft. "Just a little farther." I forced a nod and pulled back onto the road. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Every few seconds, I stole glances at her. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. But there was something off, something I couldn't place. Then I noticed. Her hands. Her nails were caked with dirt. And she was holding something. A small bundle of fabric, clutched tightly to her chest. It was wrapped in what looked like an old, yellowing blanket, the edges frayed. My stomach twisted. "What's that?" For the first time, she turned to look at me. Her lips parted. "It's my baby." A shiver ran down my spine. I laughed nervously, trying to keep my voice light. "Oh, that's nice. How old?" She didn't answer. She just turned her head back toward the road. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. The unease in my chest grew heavier with every passing second. Something wasn't right. I reached for my phone, thinking I'd send a quick text to my brother, just in case. No signal. Of course. The road stretched on, endless and empty. The farther we drove, the more I felt like we were the only two people left in the world. Then she whispered something. At first, I thought I imagined it. But then she said it again, her voice so low I could barely hear it. "He won't stop crying." I forced a smile, gripping the wheel tighter. "Babies do that." She shook her head, her fingers tightening around the bundle. "No," she said. "Not anymore." Every muscle in my body locked. I wanted to turn around, to look at her, to see if she was joking. But I didn't. I kept my eyes on the road, my pulse slamming in my ears. She shifted in her seat. "He was crying," she continued. "For so long. I told him I was sorry, that I didn't mean to. But he wouldn't stop." My throat went dry. The air in the car felt heavier, colder. I dared another glance at the bundle in her arms. It wasn't moving, wasn't shifting like a baby would. The blanket was too still, too quiet. I felt sick. I pressed my foot against the gas, desperate to get to the next town, to anywhere. The road ahead remained empty, stretching into the dark. I forced a laugh, though it came out shaky. You said we're almost there, right?" Her grip on the bundle tightened. "Yes." Then she turned to me again, her hollow eyes locking onto mine. "But you can't leave yet." I felt it before I saw it. A shift in the air. A pressure, heavy against my chest. And then, the bundle in her arms twitched. Something moved inside it. I slammed the brakes. The tires screeched, the car fishtailing before coming to a jerking stop. My breathing was ragged, my hands trembling on the wheel. I turned to her, my stomach twisting. She was gone. The seat was empty. The door was shut. The only sign she had ever been there was a damp stain on the seat. And the bundle. It sat where she had been, wrapped tightly, unmoving. I stared at it, my pulse hammering. Then, from inside the bundle, a sharp, high-pitched cry. I scrambled out of the car, nearly tripping over my own feet. My breath came in ragged gasps as I backed away, my eyes locked on the passenger seat. The crying grew louder. Then, a whisper. She's waiting. The bundle shifted. The fabric unraveled slightly. A small, pale hand peeked out. And then, it reached for me. I ran. I didn't stop running. Didn't look back. The car was still there, engine running, headlights cutting through the mist. But I couldn't go back. Wouldn't. Because I knew. If I looked inside that bundle, if I saw what was really there, I wouldn't make it out of those woods alive.